All right, folks, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about heads, cams, and intakes. Right, so here's the deal, guys. I quite honestly thought that heads, cam, and intake swaps were dead. Not dead, but like I just figured that they were gone the way of the dinosaur. Everybody's coyote swapping or Godzilla swapping or just putting a turbo on their car, whatever. Now I've come to realize that people are still doing heads, cam, and intake swaps as much, if not maybe even more, as they were in the early 90s, early 2000s, so on and so forth. And why I say that is I've had a ton of people recently reach out to me saying, hey, I got a question, I'm doing a heads, cam, and intake swap, or hey, should I do a heads, cam, and intake swap? What do you recommend? All these things. So I'm like, well, I guess this stuff's still alive and well. Now, I did a video on all this some time ago, and I figured that doing a topic and putting it out there, kind of, I guess in some ways it lives forever, but there's so much content loaded up on YouTube on a daily basis that these things, I think, just find their way to the bottom of the barrel. So I wanted to put out a video with some new, fresh, relevant information and maybe clear up a couple of the things. I got quite hyperbolic in my first video comparing like a HCI swap to just going like an On3 turbo swap, and I want to try to clarify some of those things that I was talking about. So anyway, that's how we're gonna go through and try to break all this down. Now, a neat little twist that I thought I'd throw at you is I've got a 5.0 mag here from December 1999. Interestingly enough, this magazine has some breakdowns on some heads, cam, and intake swaps with some dyno results. So we'll go through some of those and I'll show you some real world results that came out in 1999, which is kind of neat. But more so, there's pricing, right? If anyone that's my vintage knows and still has some of these mags around, I always find it crazy to go back and look at like what the pricing was for a heads, cam, and intake swap, or just say like an H-pipe, set of headers, whatever. It's staggering. And in today's day and age where inflation's out of control and we're paying outrageous amounts of money for gas, this stuff I think will be pretty wild to look at. Because one of the things that, again, I talked about in my other video was the price that I paid to do a heads, cam, and intake swap. I did all the work myself, but the amount of money I spent on parts was crazy. It's this Foxbody rabbit hole that we talk about all the time. Like, you go to do one thing and you realize while you're doing that one thing, like, it'd be a disservice if I didn't change this, that, or the other while I'm in here. I've got a good buddy right now, Josh Kennedy. Some of you guys might know him from Instagram. He's got a beautiful teal Cobra, and 93 Cobra, and he's got a black 93 Cobra that he's recently acquired that he's gotten into. What started out as like just kind of a quick little top end cleanup. I mean, he's down to short block at this point, changing the timing chain. It's getting out of control on him. So shout out to Josh. Good for you, buddy. I'm proud of you. But just to let you know, like, these things can get out of hand. If you think you're just buying heads, cam, and intake, quick little swap on an Sunday afternoon, I hate to tell you this, but you're sorely mistaken. There's gonna be all kinds of goofy little hiccups you run into that are gonna cost you more money. Okay, here we go. So 5.0 Mustang mag, Muscle Mustangs, Fast Fords, all these old school mags. For any of you that don't have any of them or weren't around when these magazines existed, I'd highly encourage you to try and find yourself some of these magazines. Try to find someone getting rid of them at a garage sale or whatever, because the information in these magazines is still very, very relevant to today's day and age and what we're trying to do to these cars still in 2022. Now, I found an article in this magazine called Dyno Tales. These guys showcase all kinds of different cars with various upgrades. A lot of them have power adders. So that being a topic in itself, I don't think it's very relevant to this topic. So I'm gonna fast forward here to this Steve Morgan with his 95 GT. The story on this car is it's a stock bottom end car. It's got a Ford E303 cam, Cobra upper and lower, iron GT40 heads, gasket matched for whatever that's worth, headers, H-pipe, cat back, stock throttle body, stock mass air, and no power adder, T5 and 373s. The overall dyno results on this car are 267 horsepower at 5,400 RPM, 299 foot-pounds of torque at 4,100 RPM. These are very realistic results that you can expect from a heads, cam, and intake swap. To give you some goalposts, okay, so you don't go to all this trouble and then get disappointed in the end result. Realistic horsepower and torque numbers that you can expect are anywhere from 250 to say high twos, like maybe crowding 3 in the horsepower department. Torque, you can safely expect high twos getting into the 3s, okay? That's realistic results. Now, something to keep in mind is these cars were 225 horsepower from the factory stock at the crank. All right, so rear wheel horsepower was way below 200 horsepower, okay? These heads, cam, and intake swaps, you will definitely feel it in the seat of your pants. The way that I always explain to people how my car changed when I did the heads, cam, and intake swap is I say, this car now feels like it probably should have from the factory. Okay, so with that being out of the way, let's move on to a little bit of a pricing comparison. So, $19.99 pricing, all right? The best example I can give you out of this ad is this Holley Systemax heads, cam, intake. Looks like you get new head bolts, your timing chain, sprockets. It's kind of a soup to nuts top end upgrade kit, okay? The Systemax 5.0 kit in 1999, pre-tax ran you $1,995. To give you a little bit of a comparison, actually before I even get to that, here's another interesting one. Cobra intake kit, $389. Now these are discontinued, you can't even find them anymore, you gotta buy them used. $389 for an upper and lower Cobra intake kit. These things, I could be off on this because the pricing's all over the place, but I think people are trying to get like $1,500 to $2,000 for them on eBay. Like, it's crazy the change of what these things are now worth. But to give you an idea from at least 2017 when I did the upgrades to my 92 Coupe, my heads were $2,000 American. I'm up here in Canada, so I got to factor in a lot of exchange there. So I'm going to call them like $2,300-400 just for aluminum AFR 165 heads. My cam I bought in Canada, but it was, I want to say $400, almost $500. Okay, and that's a comp cam 266 HR. And I had my intake. Okay, so I actually saved a bit of money there. However, I did send it to this T. Moss character. He was kind of one of the old school moderators on some of the Mustang forums. Him and his dad, I forget his dad's name now, but anyway, I shipped it down to them in the US and they ported and polished the lower intake for me to try to, one, match it to the AFR 165s, and two, just make it flow a little bit better. These Cobra intakes or GT40 intakes, for what it's worth, they do flow way better than the stock 5.0 intake. However, with the heads and the cam and the CFM that I was going to be moving in those bits and pieces, my choke off point was going to be my intake. I needed it to be ported and polished, or I was just going to be leaving horsepower on the table. So that cost me, I can't even remember now, but that's a little bit of a different story. I don't think there's too many people that are, well, maybe some of you are going to have an intake already and be buying the other bits, but call it after shipping and everything, I was probably $500. Just like, I was more money to get it ported, polished, and shipped than you could buy these intakes, upper and lowers, in 1999. So $2,500, $500, three were $3,500. Now, you haven't even factored in roller rockers, okay? You're definitely gonna wanna put new lifters in your car. You gotta upgrade your injectors. I went to 24-pound injectors. You put a new timing chain on it and sprockets. What else? I put a fuel pressure gauge on it. Like the little onesie twosie things, new push rods. You're gonna have to get new push rods. Unless you go with like an OEM style upgrade, even then I would recommend at the very least measuring to make sure that you've got the right length push rods in your car, because the last thing you want to do is start that thing, hear a clunk, and now you got dented pistons or whatever, you bent valves. You got to measure for push rod length. Chances are you're going to need new push rods, so another $300. All these little onesie twosie things that go into a heads, cam, and intake swap add up quick, and you can lose sight of them. It's like the coffee analogy, right? If you buy a coffee every day when on your way to work, at the end of the month you've spent like $200 in coffee, and you're kind of asking your better half where the hell all the money went, right? So it's the latte factor. These things add up, and maybe you want to run long tubes and you only got a set of short tubes, which in my case, again, I probably would have left horsepower on the table if I didn't go to long tubes, and I already had short tubes. Granted, I sold my short tubes, so you can kind of horse trade a little bit to offset your costs, but I'm here to tell you folks, the bills add up quickly. Don't just think you're buying those three parts, heads, cam, and intake, all right? Lots and lots of other stuff go into this. Okay, and finally, there's actually an article in here that I won't go into too much detail. I'll just share my thoughts overall on it, but really good article on GT40 iron heads. Now this is actually a setup that I'm considering for the 91 Vert. I'd like to do kind of an old school GT40 head, upper and lower intake, with a Ford, maybe a B303 or whatever cam. Just a real cool stock OEM upgrade. There are really good power gains that can come from doing your GT40 upgrades, okay? Now, are they the same as going aluminum heads? No, they're not. Something to keep in mind here is, like, there is really fine micro details that need to be considered when you're buying used parts, and for what it's worth, you're not finding a set of brand new GT40 heads or intake or any of those things. Now, I guess in some cases you could just bolt this stuff up and hope for the best, but like, I would highly recommend a trip to the machine shop with a set of GT40 heads that you buy at a swap meet, because they could be bent, your valves could be done. At the very least, you should get the valve seals done. There's costs involved with all of this, and machine shop costs aren't going down, right? They seem to be going up like everything else in the world. So let's say you buy yourself a set of GT40 heads, you get a good deal on them for $500. Then you go to the machine shop. I'm gonna say you're anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to have someone go through a set of heads. And you should probably upgrade your valve springs too. That's another $300. Like, where I'm going with all this is, you've got to be very committed to want to go the GT40 route and do it right, because by the time you're done at the machine shop with a set of GT40 heads, you probably spent as much money as a brand new set of aluminum heads. All right? So keep that in the back of your mind. There's many, many things to consider. Now, the nice part with a heads, cam, and intake upgrade is these things have been done thousands and thousands of times. There's so much information on the internet that you can find to help you through figuring all this out. But just know, this is not for the faint of heart, okay? Like, you got to be committed, and if you want this done right, where you're working on one of these old cars that are getting special and worth a bunch of money, do it right, okay? for the community, for yourself, for your sanity, just make sure you do it right. Don't cut any corners, and you're gonna enjoy. You'll be thankful that you did it that way when you're all said and done. Okay folks, now just to clear up some loose ends. For those of you that have seen my other video, I want to try to add some more context to what I was trying to explain at the time. So what I said is, I think after I was all done adding up all my receipts, which is a painful experience for any of you that have tried that, I was about $6,000 in parts to do the heads, cam, and intake swap on my 92 coupe. I have outrageous plans for it. I'd like to build a 408 stroker for it with some type of power adder. I want something that absolutely scares me and or anyone else that gets in the cab of that car. So the $6,000 that I spent on that setup, am I ever gonna get all of it back? I mean, I'm gonna lean on the side of no, because secondhand parts don't go for as much as brand new parts. I'm gonna definitely lose all the time that I put into doing it. Now, did I enjoy it while I had it? Yes. Is it a fantastic upgrade from where I started? 100%, okay? So I'm not gonna deny any of that. But I always talk about end goals. End goals need to be considered in this program, because if you're gonna spend $6,000 now and then another 10 later, now you're $16,000 into getting to your end goal, when you could have just spent 10 up front or whatever. I think you probably understand where I'm going with this. So if heads, cam, and intake are where you're gonna stop and you're just gonna leave that car the way it is till the day you die, great. Go all in. I promise you, you're gonna enjoy it. If you have bigger goals in mind, maybe keep saving. Save another $4,000, get yourself that stroker system and go from there. An On3 turbo setup is like $2,000, let's say, in parts. Give or take, okay? Don't kill me on the exact numbers here, but for what it's worth. If you're just hunting for horsepower numbers, it's my recommendation that you consider maybe just go on the turbo route. Now, a lot of things come with power adder like upgrades, okay? Turbos have lag and they're finicky and they don't like different wild temperature extremes and so on and so forth. But if you just want to go fast, I think the turbo route maybe should be considered over and above the heads, cam, and intake route. I hope that clears things up for you guys as to what I was trying to say. It's a weird topic. It's one in which you could literally crush boxes and boxes of beer trying to figure out what the best course of action is. Just know that you need end goals in mind. You got to do it right. Don't half-ass any of this stuff, okay? You'll regret it in the end. And do what's best for you, all right? Don't do what everyone else is doing. Like, sit down and really ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish here? What's going to make me the most happy? And where are my dollars best spent? All right, folks, that was a long-winded one, but I hope this information helps. I'm sure I left some things out, as I always do, but if I did, or you want to hear a little bit more on a specific topic that I brought up, by all means, hit me up down below, send me an email, whatever the case. I do love talking about this stuff. As always, folks, thanks so much for tagging along. I really appreciate you guys' time and your views. And if you think this might help somebody out there that is going through a potential heads, cam, and intake swap, please send it along to them. I love helping the community. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye for now.